It is time to set waivers for week number 11 in fantasy football, and it's good we're here to talk on Tuesday afternoon because there has been some news throughout the day for today that will update the way we fill out our waivers for week number 11. Some news around Damian Harris, some news around Elijah Mitchell that may influence our waiver prioritizations for this week. So let's dive on in, take your questions, and get you set for this run of waivers. It is the Waiver Wire Q&A. That's right here on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter channels. My name is Jim Sannes. I am a senior writer and analyst for NumberFire.com, joined here as always by JJ Zachariason. He is the editor-in-chief of NumberFire and FanDuel. JJ, heading into week number 11, it looked like a pretty thin waiver wire for this week, but things definitely in motion as of right now. How you doing today?
I'm good. Yeah. I mean, it seems like there's a couple, one running back I talked about on in the 15 transactions column and podcast, with Cordarrelle Patterson's situation that's going on there. But yeah, it looks like Elijah Mitchell is the big news that just recently popped.
Yeah, so if you hadn't heard yet, Elijah Mitchell broke his finger in Monday Night Football. He is now questionable for this week. We'll talk more about that in just 1 second. First, a quick reminder to make sure you are subscribed on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, or Twitter page. No matter where you want to watch, we are live here each and every weekday, Monday through Friday, at 4 p.m. Eastern. We're talking football Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Tom Vecchio as you set for NBA DFS every Wednesday. So again, 4 p.m. to 4:30 every weekday right here on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages. Make sure you're subscribed, but also if you're watching YouTube, hit that like button because that does help us out quite a bit. Okay, Eli Mitchell broke his finger. Sounds like he still has a shot to practice tomorrow and potentially play this week. So JJ, based on the info right now that we've got, how are you viewing Jeff Wilson Jr. on waivers for week 11?
Yeah, I mean, look, it would be a 1 week play for Wilson, and then he kind of goes back into that like 1B kind of role where, the other thing too in that game against the Rams we have to keep in mind is that San Francisco was not in a negative game script at all, and Jeff Wilson was playing some third downs in that game when like Deebo Samuel wasn't lined up in the backfield, and so I do have this fear slash I think that moving forward. JaMychal Hasty didn't play in that game on Monday last night. And he's been playing that third down pass catching role in that backfield. The week prior in week 9, there was some optimism because Elijah Mitchell was seeing a little bit more work in a super negative game script as a receiver. But JaMychal Hasty did get banged up in that game, and that's why he ended up missing week 10. So basically what I'm saying here is, I don't know if Elijah Mitchell is going to be the third down guy, the pass catching guy in this offense from here on out. That was always the fear really with Elijah Mitchell and why I couldn't really like place him in this like high end RB2, low end RB1 tier that a lot of people were like optimistic about. And then we see Jeff Wilson get utilized the way he was utilized. He had 27% of the team's running back rushes. That does not count Deebo Samuel, but he saw 27% of those running back rushes. And I think that's the kind of role that we should expect, like a 70-30 kind of split between Mitchell and Jeff Wilson, but Wilson was probably going to be the pass catching back, in that offense regardless. So, I think that because of that, Wilson can probably be rostered regardless of, Elijah Mitchell playing this weekend or not, but you definitely have to add Wilson, as a speculative ad, just to see what happens with this Elijah Mitchell injury. It sounds like at worst, it's going to be 1 week for Mitchell, which is not surprising. It's a finger. Kyle Shanahan even said that he might even be able to practice tomorrow. So, he's getting surgery. It doesn't sound like it's major surgery or anything. So yeah, I mean, I would still add Jeff Wilson. Where would I place him? My priority. I would still go, if Ramondre Stevenson's out there, I'd still go after Stevenson over Jeff Wilson, just because there's the slight chance that they do end up featuring Ramondre Stevenson, even when Damian Harris is back. I don't think that's going to happen. The way that I see Ramondre is more so he's going to be like the Rex Burkhead in that backfield. If you guys recall how they utilized Burkhead, where he was sort of seeing some early down work and then he'd see more receiving work, but he wasn't full-blown James White and he wasn't full-blown LeGarrette Blount. And then, when it comes to Wayne Gallman, I think that he's probably, Wayne Gallman versus Jeff Wilson, I'd probably prefer Wilson maybe slightly, only because I think that there's a longer term role there for him. And I think that Atlanta's still going to split their backfield up, and whereas Wilson could see a heavier workload. But I can at least make the argument for Gallman.
And I think that Wilson is the easier path to high leverage work. And that by that, I mean
Yeah.
goal line work and targets, because Wilson at the end of last year averaged like 4 targets per game the final 5 games. JaMychal Hasty was out this past week. So we have to keep that in mind. We don't really know what Wilson's role will look like in the passing game when Hasty is healthy, but they did run 4 snaps inside the 13-yard line last night, and Wilson was in for one of those snaps. Mitchell was in for 2. Kai Juszczyk was in for 1. Of course, Debo had that rushing attempt as well. So it's a mobile situation, a liquid situation. So we'll see how that winds up playing out. But I think that Wilson has a path to getting some high leverage work, which means even if we assume Mitchell plays this week, Wilson could still be an ad for there. I'll start the questions off over on YouTube by talking to Matt. He says, should I keep living the stream with Ryan Tannehill, Tua Tagovailoa, and Cam Newton on waivers, or try to get someone like Russell Wilson or Kyler Murray for the rest of the year? What are you thinking here, JJ? Are you trying to buy low on one of those quarterbacks, or do you think the streamers this week are good enough?
It always depends on what kind of price you would get for those guys. I had the Seahawks passing attack as a buy in my 15 transactions column, because if you look at their next month, basically 3 of the 4 games that they have are really, really favorable for the passing attack, specifically Russell Wilson, because some of those teams do defend wide receivers fairly well. But that Russell Wilson's going to funnel targets to those wideouts, so it's not that big of a deal from a matchup standpoint. And then this week is really the one matchup of those 4 that's kind of iffy. But the Arizona game could shoot out. It could be high scoring. So I'm not really that concerned about it. So, I think Russ is actually a pretty good buy low. If the person who has Russ is concerned about the finger, or thinks that the finger is the reason that he did what he did on Sunday, and maybe it had something to do with it, but from all reports and accounts, and what Russell Wilson was saying is that it had nothing to do with it, that Wilson was just a little bit rusty after not playing. It makes sense. He was sleeping 3 hours a night. So, I'm not that surprised that, he came out against a very improved and playing a lot better Green Bay defense. Let's at least recognize that. I would say that Russ is a decent buy low, but I'd also say that if a guy like Tua and Tannehill are on your waivers, you can probably find decent options each and every week. Tannehill this week is fine. Tua this week I think is a really good option. Even Cam is a decent option this week. So
yeah.
I think it just depends if you can really, really buy low. And if you can't really buy low, I'd be fine streaming in a league like this.
Yeah, and I think that it's worth noting, this helps answer Shake and Bake's question too about buy low targets here. You're talking about the Seattle Seahawks passing game. Russ couldn't take snaps under center this week, and that hurts their play action game. And that's kind of where Russ cooks the most, is, play action deep shots. They couldn't do that really on Sunday. So once he gets healthier, once they have that back in their arsenal, that's going to help things quite a bit for that passing offense. Also talking about Seattle here, CJ is wanting us to grade the trade. They gave up Tyler Lockett and Odell Beckham and got DK Metcalf. Odell, 3 targets in his debut, limited snaps, but that role should expand because Ben Skoranek was out there a bunch for the Rams. What do you think about this one, JJ?
I think it's fine. I think DK is a better asset to have than Tyler Lockett. They might see similar volume, but DK will probably see higher leverage targets in that offense. And then OBJ, I think, is probably going to be like a wide receiver 3-ish once he's, more acclimated to the offense. It's hard to assume that he's going to be a wide receiver 2, not only because of the way that the offense is performing, but Robert Woods wasn't even necessarily a wide receiver 2 in that offense, throughout the season. He was very inconsistent. So I don't think that we should assume that OBJ is going to be that, because they're still utilizing other players in that offense, specifically Van Jefferson.
Yeah, and we talk about like how tough it is for receivers to transition like over the offseason to a new team. In season, pretty tough as well, for sure, especially like complex offense like Sean McVay's. I'd expect a pretty slow ramp up for there too. Okay, let's talk to Dan. Get a little antsy with TJ Hockenson. The Detroit Lions offense ain't great. Is it okay to pivot to Dan Arnold if you got TJ Hockenson currently starting for you as a baseline?
Yeah, it's fine if you want to. I think people are sort of like overstating. I'm going to pull it up right now because I want to make sure that I'm getting the right information whenever I say this. But I feel like people are sort of like overstating how bad TJ Hockenson has been this year. If you look at his PPR performances before this past week, he ranked 1st, 11th, and 7th in weekly scoring at the tight end position. He was averaging like a 20, almost, I guess, over a 30% target share over those 3 games. And then this past week, he just had a bad game. And sometimes that happens, right? Now, would I add Dan Arnold? Sure, because I think Dan Arnold's a tight end 1 from here on out, the way that he's being utilized. He has the most targets in that Jaguars offense ever since DJ Chark went down. He's averaging like over a 20% target share. During that time, he has 4 of his 5 last games have been double-digit PPR performances. I mean, I can go on and on why Dan Arnold should be rostered, but I feel like people just like aren't connected. Yes, TJ Hockenson has been way more inconsistent than we would like, of course. But inherently the tight end position is inconsistent, and we're going to get that. And so, it was a really bad outing for TJ Hockenson, but if anything, I might honestly try to trade for TJ Hockenson right now, because it seems like everyone who has him, which I have him across a couple of leagues as well, seems like everyone who has him just like wants to get rid of him or wants an alternative option. I do think Dan Arnold is going to give you a higher floor week in and week out than TJ Hockenson will, probably just given the usage that he's had, given the consistency that he's shown. But I don't think that Dan Arnold has the same type of ceiling week in and week out that TJ Hockenson has.
Yeah, and I mean, like it was on the road against one of the best defenses in football in weird conditions with the quarterback dealing with an oblique injury. That's not the situation they'll have every week. Like it's going to get better.
The passing attack did absolutely nothing, just in general, for a lot of reasons, right? I mean, the ground game was working, but you can't assume that kind of game script for Detroit from here on out either. That's the other thing to keep in mind.
Exactly. Let's go to Tanantha here and talk about Van Jefferson. Would you drop Van Jefferson for Jeff Wilson, Wayne Gallman? Now, I was worried about Van Jefferson, who I love. When the Odell news dropped, I was very sad. Then I was doubly sad because Robert Woods got hurt, but it does mean that Van Jefferson likely, I'd assume, has a big role going forward. Like, I think projecting Van Jefferson to keep his previous role, which was decently good, is realistic. Am I wrong to think that, but I want to still hold Van? What's your thoughts on him relative to Jeff Wilson and Wayne Gallman?
Yeah, I mean, both of us have talked up Van because of his peripherals for, the last month or so. And, if you're replacing Robert Woods with Odell Beckham in that offense, I don't see how Van Jefferson gets worse, right?
Right.
He had a really bad game, from a film perspective, against San Francisco on Monday night. But his peripherals were still fine. I mean, he actually ran more routes than any other player on that team on Monday night. And then on top of that, he had like a 17-ish% target share, which is right in line with what we've seen from Van Jefferson since they got rid of Deshaun Jackson. So I'm still in on Van. I think that I'm higher than the market on Van. I wouldn't be shocked if he's a wide receiver 3 from a points per game basis from here on out, just because where he's getting his targets, the amount of volume he's getting, the kind of offense he's in, it's all the kinds of things that you want in a fantasy asset. So I would hold on to Van in this case. Obviously depends on what your needs are. But I wouldn't be concerned with the other players in that offense, just because, if anything, his situation has improved since before the OBJ news.
Yeah, Bennett Skoranek was like a graduate transfer to Notre Dame who played tight end for Notre Dame and is starting out of necessity. Like, I wouldn't worry about him eating into Van Jefferson's role. But also go Cats. Tanantha is asking, who do you like the rest for this week? Between the Browns defense facing Detroit, got the Dolphins going up against the Jets, and the 49ers facing the Jaguars. What you got between those three? All pretty good options.
Yeah, all really good options. I'm going to go with the Dolphins, though, against the Jets. They're playing really, really well. 9 sacks over their last 2 games, 4 interceptions. They played well against, Lamar Jackson in the Baltimore offense this past week. The Jets have been one of the best defenses in adjusted fantasy points allowed for defenses. So I'm going to go with Miami there. But, yeah, all 3 of the options are pretty good.
Yeah, and the Dolphins play a style that's conducive to fantasy because they get sacks, they get picks, they're very aggressive, they let up points as a result, but that's what you want for fantasy. So Darnell asking, Cordarrelle Patterson versus Amari Cooper the rest of the way. Cordarrelle banged up. Sounds like he's probably not going to play this week. Who do you have between these two?
Yeah, I mean, in some doctors, Dr. Edwin Porras for fantasy points, he's not it doesn't seem like he's that optimistic about Cordarrelle Patterson, in the short term, as in like he can miss a couple weeks with this injury. Yeah. It's not just like a 1-week thing. So I think because of that, I'd probably lean Amari rest of season. But, I would be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit concerned about Amari Cooper rest of season. I'm concerned to some degree about each of the pass catchers on that team with Michael Gallup active. Dalton Schultz was one of the biggest losers this past week with like a 6% target share with Michael Gallup back, but Amari Cooper also had his lowest target share of the season this past week. So I think it's at least something to keep in mind. But yeah, I mean, I think because of the injury, if you want to use that as a tiebreaker, I'd probably go with Amari.
Yeah, Amari's ceiling will always be good because everyone's saying that offense is good because it's tied to Dak, but the floor is, concerning for sure. But with Cordarrelle being banged up, that is, I think, a pretty easy one for me to go with Amari. Tanantha, is Latavius a pickup with Le'Veon Bell being cut? I think to me, this indicates that Latavius likely to be back this week for Baltimore off of the mini bye after they played Thursday, but Devonta Freeman also played pretty well. So where are you at with Latavius Murray right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Latavius is probably not going to see the same workload that he like. I think there's a chance that Devonta Freeman is now the 1A versus, I mean, there's like a 1A, 1B, 1C in that offense. So it's not saying much, but I do think that Devonta Freeman's played well enough to the point where he could be the 1A, which is what Latavius Murray had been, where Murray was seeing like 45% of the running back rushes and like, like an 8% target share at times and whatnot, which is what Devonta Freeman's been seeing. So, is he a pickup? Sure. It just depends on who you'd be dropping him for. I would rather go for upside with like a Wayne Gallman or something as opposed to going with Latavius.
I think that makes sense as well. Let's talk to Trevor here. Should I trade Nick Chubb for DK Metcalf? So we're talking about the Seahawks pass catchers again. Nick Chubb for Metcalf. Who you got?
I feel like the way this question's asked, it's like there were like some blanks that he had to fill in. And he just filled in Chubb and then Metcalf. I'd probably keep Nick Chubb over Metcalf just because of scarcity. It depends on what you need and the format and all that kind of stuff for a trade like this. But, if it's like a half PPR 12-team league, I'm going to lean Nick Chubb. I just think that he plays a position that matters more in fantasy football. I love Metcalf. I think Metcalf's a really good buy as I talked about on the column and in my podcast. But, Nick Chubb's probably a top 10-ish running back right now rest of season.
I think the thing that helps Chubb too is that every game is going to matter a lot for Cleveland. We saw last year down the stretch when they needed wins, they leaned on Nick Chubb a bit more than they did earlier on, so that could help him as well. Let's talk to Mark here. Thoughts on Justin Fields as a streamer this week or rest of season? Facing Baltimore this week, pretty tough situation, but Fields did show a lot of life in a tough situation before his bye too. So thoughts on Justin Fields as a streamer?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with this week, I think there's a lot of pretty good streamers. There's four, you got Daniel Jones in a decent spot. You have even Mac Jones in a decent spot. And then I think Cam Newton and Tua are the two like go-to streamers this week. Specifically, like I think Tua is a great play this week. I mean, if you look at what Tua's faced this season, he's had 2+ matchups only. He's faced Buffalo twice. He's faced New England. He's faced Baltimore. I mean, he's not had the easiest looking schedule in the world. And then his 2+ matchups, Atlanta and Jacksonville, he went nuts. He's averaged 24 points per game in those 2 games. So this week, a really good matchup for him. I think he's a really strong streamer this week. I would play him over a guy like Justin Fields. But if you want to add Fields for rest of season upside, I think that he has more upside than a lot of the guys just because of what he can do with his legs.
Pretty controversial to say the Jets are a plus matchup, given they've let up like 40 points in 6 of the past 8 games,
Yeah.
Controversial, JJ. Let's talk to Dan. Jalen Hurts has had a bounce back recently, but isn't sure what to view of him with the Eagles deciding to fully go with establishing the run. Now, he's got Tua as potentially being available for this week. He has Derek Carr is facing Cincinnati. So how are you viewing Jalen Hurts compared to guys who are in decent spots and decent quarterbacks and Derek Carr and Tua Tagovailoa?
I think sorry, I was looking to the side because I'm looking at my other monitor for some data. So I think that the Hurts stuff is very, very overblown. And I say that because he was never going to maintain the rushing touchdown output that he had to start the season. And that was one of the main reasons why instead of him being like a mid-range QB1, he was like close to the QB1, right? And that's gone away partially because they're running the ball more and naturally if you put the ball in the running back's hands a little bit more, they're going to have a higher chance to score those rushing touchdowns. But Jalen Hurts over the last 4 weeks is still averaging 62 rushing yards per game. And the other thing too is before this past week, they had a really skewed pass to rush touchdown ratio, which is something to always keep in mind and focus on when looking at regression, because when teams score touchdowns, they're going to score touchdowns either through the air or on the ground. And if they're scoring touchdowns on the ground a whole lot versus through the air, you should expect that number to regress back to a mean eventually. And we even saw that last week. He had 2 passing touchdowns. Even the week before he had 1. So a lot of people were just like worried about what was going on. Understandably so, given these like the game scripts they'd seen, et cetera, et cetera. But if you go back and look, okay, they faced Detroit 2 weeks ago in an insane positive game script, right? And against Detroit, they ended up, they threw the ball 14 times. And then against the Chargers, they threw the ball 17 times. But the Chargers have had one of the worst, if not the worst, rush defense in the league this year. So matchups dictated that a little bit. And then this past week in a more neutral game script, 23 pass attempts, couple of passing touchdowns, still had 53 yards on the ground. I still think Jalen Hurts is totally fine. And not only that, but in the fantasy playoffs, they get Washington twice. And right now, Washington, I know they played well against Tom Brady, but Washington right now still ranks first in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. So I'm sticking with Jalen Hurts. I feel like he's fine. And I feel like people are overstating the situation a little bit just because they expected him to be like the QB1. But I think that if you look at him more as like the QB5 to QB8, then, that's basically where I think he should be.
Yeah, and he's playing well enough where the previous concerns about like Gardner Minshew seem to have gone away. And I think that's beneficial for Hurts too. Okay, we talked about the Tua half of Joseph's question, but let's go to the other half here. They've got the Dolphins defense facing off again with the Jets. We talked about liking them. Do you like them more than the Browns facing Detroit? And do you like them more than Tennessee, who is facing off with, I can't actually find it on my sheet.
I don't remember.
Houston.
Yeah, that's right, Houston. I'd still probably go Miami because I trust Miami's defense right now more than I do Tennessee's. Tennessee, I only mentioned Tennessee because I think their matchup is, it's obviously very good. And we already said that we would go Dolphins over Browns. So I'm going Dolphins there. I think the Dolphins are the number one defense this week, period. Like, I don't think that there's a better defense to play. And then with Tua, yes, Tua is my top streamer this week. I think he's at least the safest. I think that you could go to Cam hypothetically. But I think Tua has just as much upside just because of the matchup and the fact that he's played, a lot better than people are giving him credit for.
Yeah. Another defensive question here from Grim Fan over on YouTube. Would you pick up the Patriots defense and start them until their bye week? Now, they get Tennessee and Buffalo the next 2 weeks. Those are pretty tough spots to use a defense in. But this week they get Atlanta. So how do you view them in week 11 specifically compared to, let's go with the Dolphins, because it seems like they're pretty widely available right now.
You can play them against Atlanta for sure. I would still play Miami. I really think Miami's like the top overall defense this week. But, New England's defense is playing well. I would feel fine trotting them out against Atlanta, but I would not feel as good against Tennessee and Buffalo.
Let's go here to Jeffrey. Do you think Emmanuel Sanders is better to have than Jacoby Myers? Now, Jacoby Myers finally scored this week, so that's the monkey is off the back there. Where are you viewing Manny compared to Jacoby the rest of the way?
Yeah, Manny's allure was that he was seeing a lot of those deep targets, and it seems like some of that's going a little bit more to Stephon Diggs than it was earlier in the season. And Manny's now seeing, I think, a sub 10% target share in like 2 of his last 3 or something like that. So things are definitely trending down for Manny, but with Jacoby Myers, to me, especially if you're in like a half PPR or a standard league, he's just not going to give you the upside that Emmanuel Sanders could potentially give you in a given week, right? I know that he found the end zone this past week. I'm very excited about that because I've been talking about it on my podcast for like weeks. But at the same time, Myers, sure, he's probably a safer bet to give you fantasy points each week, but I think Sanders still has upside. And when you're talking about this tier of player where, maybe it's like a flex play or like a first guy off the bench kind of thing, I'm looking more at upside. And Emmanuel Sanders also has upside. If, knock on wood, something happens to like Stephon Diggs or something, then all of a sudden Emmanuel Sanders has 10 plus target upside each and every week with Josh Allen throwing him the rock. So I still like Emmanuel Sanders more than Jacoby Myers from here on out, but Jacoby Myers probably does have a safer floor, at least in like a PPR format.
And I think that the difference in them in a median projection perspective is minimal. Like maybe Myers does have the better projection there, but like you said, the upside matters a lot because if you can take a fringe piece and have them with the ability to turn into a core piece, that's kind of what you want. Jacoby Myers doesn't really have that upside, whereas Emmanuel Sanders does due to the reasons that you mentioned. Let's go back to DJ here on Facebook. Get Friarmuth off waivers. Obviously, this past week was not great, had the fumble at the end, but also didn't have Big Ben for that game. Sounding more optimistic now that Ben will play in week 11. I know initially Jay Glazer said he didn't think he would.
I think they might have said, Tomlin might have said like literally right when we were starting that Mason Rudolph's going to play again.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So I think I could be wrong, but I think I saw it flash on my phone before we got on. I just didn't look in more detail. So if it's Mason Rudolph, I mean, it definitely changes Freiermuth from being honestly like a tight end 1 to a tight end 2. But Freeman still saw like 18% of the targets this past week, and that was with Eric Ebron back. So, I still think Freiermuth is a good get off waivers right now.
Yeah, and
I could also be wrong, so definitely fact check me, people. But I just want to at least throw that out there.
I tried to check Twitter, couldn't find it right away, but we'll check back on that later. Okay, Nathan has a trade question with some things in flux with Elijah Mitchell, which may be complicating here. I'm guessing Nathan asked this after we were talking about Mitchell. So I think that he knows Mitchell is banged up. Would you trade Zeke Elliott and I'm assuming this is Deontay Johnson for Tyreek Hill and Elijah Mitchell with Mitchell being banged up? How would you view the situation right now?
I would take the Zeke side personally. I don't like same position for same position deals like this, but I understand in a situation like this, there's a clear tier difference in the wide receiver and the running back that you're getting. But to me, like from a value perspective, Zeke and Tyreek probably have similar value in fantasy right now, just generally speaking. Whenever you factor in positional scarcity and such. And then, if you're looking at this from like an Elijah Mitchell versus Deontay Johnson standpoint, I'd take Deontay Johnson over Elijah Mitchell. So I'm gonna lean Zeke and Deontay there.
Yeah, 13 targets is just like the assumed number for Deontay Johnson. And no matter the quarterback quality, 13 targets is a lot. That's worth quite a bit for sure. Let's talk to Eddie. Should I continue with Adrian Peterson or dump him? So basically asking, can we cut Adrian Peterson with Deontay Foreman becoming more involved in this offense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that he's at least like on that fringe cut list. I always hate to say, yes, drop this guy no matter what, because it depends so much on your environment, how many teams are in your league, what the waiver wire looks like, who you're adding for that guy. But he's very clearly the RB5 on this team with Chubb, Barkley, Henderson, and Javonte Williams. I mean, in this case, you can dump him, but just, make sure that like whenever you drop a guy that no other team in your league is going to really, really benefit. But I see this backfield as just a mess from here on out in terms of fantasy. I mean, PPR formats, you probably still want McNichols because he's still seeing the highest target share in that backfield. But now that Deontay Foreman's getting more work, it's just really hard to trust Peterson right now.
Yeah, I think that it's just a mess. It's kind of like the Ravens at this point, and that's not what we want for fantasy. Let's talk to Michelle. We were talking about the Eagles offense before and how they've been this super, super run-heavy team. Devonta Smith had a couple touchdowns this past week, but he's getting these insane target shares, but it's on, you're talking 17 pass attempts. He's had 6 targets per game in this 4-game sample. So would you look to move Devonta Smith or keep that production and hope that the passing volume increases as the year goes along?
Yeah, the way that I see this is I don't know if the market is that robust for Devonta Smith right now, even though he's been doing really well. So, from that standpoint, you have to always look at the market and you have to always look at the player himself. So from a market standpoint, Devonta Smith, I don't think would really have this like amazing market. I think that it would just be reasonable for him. And then the player himself, you mentioned he's seeing really good target share numbers, which is good because if game script goes a different way, or if they start to throw the ball a little bit more, then all of a sudden Devonta Smith sees 10 or 11 targets in a game. And Dallas Goedert's banged up as well. So, that's good for him. And then also the schedule is actually pretty good as well for this Eagles offense moving forward. That was a big reason why a couple weeks ago I had Devonta as a buy is because he had that environment and like, they were coming off that game against Detroit where they barely threw and all that, where people would be down on him in the passing offense. But, the schedule's decent. He's seeing enough work in the offense, and I just don't think the market's really there. So I would hold Devonta Smith right now.
Yeah, he's being productive on limited volume. So if he gets more volume, he should be very good. I think that's tough for me to move if the market is not super enthused about him. Okay, let's rank some tight ends for Joseph here. Dawson Knox, Dan Arnold, Pat Freiermuth, and Logan Thomas. Logan Thomas, we still don't know his status. I think he missed practice again Friday. He's been designated to return, but not activated yet. So how are you viewing these 4 tight ends?
I'm going to go Dan Arnold. Let's go Muth second, Logan Thomas third, and Knox fourth. But I think Dan Arnold honestly is like in his own tier of this group. It's crazy, but like the volume he's seeing is so strong. Maybe you can make the argument for Pat Freiermuth just because Ben would eventually return. And then the Logan Thomas thing is mostly speculation. So if you want to put Knox over Logan Thomas, I can totally understand it. But to me, I think Darnold and Freiermuth are the top 2 at least.
And Logan Thomas is on a lot of waivers right now. I would say if you're desperate for a tight end, I might just add him now and see if he gets activated later on this week. See what happens. It might not happen. You can always make a change later on, but he's on decent number of waivers right now. Okay, got to let DJ roast me. I told him to pick Pittsburgh in his Survivor contest. Then I'm probably responsible for Ben Roethlisberger testing positive, if we're being honest here, because I told him to take Pittsburgh in a Survivor contest. They tied. So DJ, I've cursed you. My bad. So JJ, are we going Cleveland against Detroit in Survivor this week?
Does in a Survivor does a tie mean that you take the L?
I'm pretty sure you do not advance as far as I'm aware. Yeah.
I think Cleveland's fine. Yeah. I mean, you can go with Miami too. Oh no, you shouldn't go with Miami actually. I told Jim earlier, I was just thinking defensive streamers. I told Jim earlier this week, I couldn't like comprehend the 3-point spread for that game. It feels like it just should have been like close. And this is just all feel based, but it felt like it should have been closer to like 5 or maybe even 6, just because of the way that Miami's been playing. But yeah, I think Cleveland's a pretty good survivor pick, I think, against Detroit.
Okay, so DJ didn't pick them, so we're good. I feel less bad than DJ. I'm glad I didn't curse Ben Roethlisberger, so at least there's that. Final one here. Do you see Lance playing this season? Not sure if he's droppable in Superflex where there's only 2 quarterbacks in the wire. Now, Jimmy Garoppolo's playing decent. Not playing a lot because they don't have to throw a lot, but like, would you drop Trey Lance in Superflex right now, given that they're kind of not in position to move on from Garoppolo just yet?
There was a really interesting tweet from Ben Baldwin that said something along the lines of like how it's interesting how San Francisco's running their offense where they're trying to not expose their quarterback, but then the entire offense is predicated on the quarterback converting third downs, which is basically what it is, right? So the instant that doesn't go in their favor, it could be bad news for Jimmy G. In a super flex format, look, if you're in a single quarterback redraft, you don't have to hold on to Trey Lance. But in a super flex format, I would absolutely be holding on to Trey Lance still, and I'm doing it in leagues. And it's annoying that it hasn't happened yet. I touted him at the beginning of the season. I was really, really wrong about that because Jimmy Garoppolo is obviously still the starter. But I do think the upside is certainly there, especially for the fantasy playoffs in a super flex format.
If you can gain a quarterback 10 this late in the year, which is where Lance would be if he were to be starter, I think it's tough to turn that down unless you really are desperate for that bench position. That is all that we have here for today on the Waiver Wire Q&A. But as a reminder, once again, we are live here each and every weekday at 4 p.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages. Tom Vecchio has you covered tomorrow for NBA DFS. So hit subscribe. Make sure you swing back once again tomorrow at 4 p.m. for that. JJ, big thank you once again, and good luck to you once again with waivers this week.
Thanks, Jim.
Make sure you check out the Late Round Podcast to find JJ's work. Wherever you get your podcasts, you can find JJ on Twitter at Late Round QB. You can find 15 transactions in written form up on numberfire.com. I'm at Jim Sannes, Jimsannes. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you with waivers. We'll talk to you once again next week. This has been the Waiver Wire Q&A.